Hi, and welcome to this latest immigration law conversation. I've got the privilege today of being joined by Rabina Haque. Rabina is an independent probation officer, a risk assessor, a trauma-informed trainer, and even an award-winning author. Rabina, thank you so much for joining me today. Today, we're going to talk a bit about your work in risk assessment, in deportation cases, and particularly for legal representatives working with victims of trauma. But Rabina, tell us a bit about you, your background, and what you do.
Thank you very much, Adam, for having me here, and good afternoon to everybody. So, where do I start? 21 years old, I did a law degree, was my original degree. Then I realized that, if I want to be a solicitor, I've got to go for 2 more years training. I thought, no, 21 years old, I want to conquer the world. So I spoke to my careers advisor, and he said to me, why don't you consider probation? And I went, probation, never heard of that before. And he said, yeah, the Home Office will pay for your degree. And it's something like an apprenticeship. You do 6 months at university, 6 months in placement. I thought, well, that was music to my ears. So I joined my career in the probation service, got my qualification, and I was employed by the National Probation Service. I worked in all aspects of the probation service. So I worked in the court team, I worked in the community, I did a short spell in prison, and I worked in the public protection team as well. And then Chris Grayling, as we all have to thank him for, decided to split the probation service into a private and public sector. So, and that's when I thought I resigned as an employee of the National Service and became a locum worker. Just simply because I didn't like the way the service was going, really. So I set my own business up, ABCD Global. And since then, I kind of write reports for immigration matters, family matters. So anyone who's been convicted in the UK of an offence and is facing either a civil court or a criminal court. And during that, I wanted to kind of brandish myself, to be different, kind of stand up for everybody else. So I wrote a book, How to Become an Award-Winning, as I became an award-winning author. And this book is about promoting probation. Not many people really know what the role of a probation officer is. So even myself, when I went in as blind. I didn't really know what the role actually consisted of. So I wrote this book and I won an award for it. And then I was starting to look at neurodiversity as well as trauma-informed. And then I did a short course in trauma-informed and became a trauma-informed practitioner. And I've got my kind of certificate for that. And so, so I did kind of that. And I recently set up a business, CIC business, to support women within the criminal justice system, either coming into the system for the first time or exiting the system for the first time, to kind of support them and kind of build their confidence. And I'm currently doing my coaching qualification.
Fantastic. So a broad range of expertise, Rabina, over your years. I suppose the first time I encountered your work was in the context of an immigration deportation appeal, where you produce independent risk assessments, perhaps in cases where there are not an OASIS report, or perhaps there has been a passage of time, or perhaps somebody seeking revocation of a deportation order. Just tell us a bit about your approach and what your independent risk assessments involve and the sort of reports you prepare.
Okay, so my report gives the court and the Home Office a holistic overview of so it's not just focusing on the conviction, not focusing on the previous convictions. The Home Office that's what they focus in, and then they say, it's high risk. Well, actually, they don't look at the circumstances. So when we're talking about offending behaviour, it doesn't only happen in isolation. There is a context to that behaviour, and it's about understanding, and more importantly, to understand what contributed to that offending behaviour, and how we as a society and individual can support that individual to reduce reoffending and reduce, more importantly, the risk of harm and risk of reoffending. So it's about managing, supporting people robustly. And importantly, it's about public protection. So my independent report focuses on public protection. I look at the causes of the offending behaviour, which is like from social, developmental, health, psychological. And it's about working in collaboration with multidisciplinary approach. So working with immigration solicitors, probation officers, psychologists if it requires, social services if it requires, and other professionals as well. So it's looking at that individual in a holistic overview, and I then write the report and I look at the accommodation, employment, trade, all the other factors are incorporated in a comprehensive report. So that being said, what information I really require from solicitors is actually their Home Office refusal letter, judge's comment about the index offence, and potentially any social services report or psychological report that kind of informed my risk assessment. And when I'm looking at risk assessment, what do I mean by risk assessment? I'm looking at both dynamic and static factors. And you've got to understand the static and the dynamic factors which impact on individuals' risk, because risk is dynamic. It can change from low to medium to high, as we all know. And importantly, what I look at is how that individual can integrate into the community. So, for example, they've committed an offence, they've served their sentence, and it's about, okay, so we're looking at deportation simply because on the basis that they've breached a protocol, that they haven't been of good behavior. So it's about looking at, okay, so how can this person then become integrated into the community? So I understand some people can't work because of immigration matter, but it's about looking at voluntary work to show and to prove to themselves, to society, to the Home Office, to the court, to say, actually, I can't work, but I'm doing voluntary work as a payback to the community. I've committed an offence, I've done this is my payback to the community. Maybe also kind of supporting their families, so their partners are the financial breadwinner, supporting children, picking them up, taking them to school, or if they're a minor, supporting them to enable the partner to go. So it's about evidencing the work that they're doing in order to integrate into the community.
That's fantastic. You've already answered one of my questions. I was going to ask about the information you need from solicitors. What sort of, do you apply any specific tests or metrics when you do this assessment?
Yeah, so we have an assessment called OASIS. And also we look at risk scores, risk of reoffending, risk of harm. If it's a domestic violence case, we then look at domestic abuse. And there's a assessment called SARA, similar to something if someone has been convicted of sexual offences. So it's putting information, both dynamic and static factor, into a tool, a Home Office tool, which then gives us a percentage, which then indicates whether the OGA score is about them committing an offence and the likelihood of committing that offence in the future. And the RSR score is about looking at static and dynamic factors, and it refers to the tendency of convicting a criminal offence and the likelihood of that happening, whether it's imminent or, yeah. Thank you.
And just some nuts and bolts for any solicitors or representatives watching. Do you tend to interview clients then in person, online? How do you conduct your sort of interviews with clients?
Yeah, so I'm fairly robust in the sense that because I'm in the West Midlands and I have an office in Coventry, but I can fairly, I'm quite agile, I can move around. But if there was clients back in Wales, or if it's distance, then preference is face to face.
Yeah.
Because then you observe the body language, which gives more than what the spoken words are. But also I do via Zoom, via WhatsApp, so I'm fairly flexible with the needs of the clients, really.
And in immigration appeals these days, time limits and deadlines are so important. In terms of somebody instructing you, what's your turnaround time from initial instructions?
I normally say 15 working days, but I've had solicitors to say, Rabina, can you turn this around within 24 hours? I am fairly flexible and I kind of meet the needs of the solicitors or their firm, really.
Yeah, anybody watching, I'm not encouraging them to instruct you with 24 hours notice. I was give you that full notice. And just from a lawyer's perspective, a good risk assessment is relevant in an Article 8 deportation appeal when it comes to the question of proportionality and 117 C of the 2002 Act, where we look at the very compelling circumstances. So that risk of reoffending is important there. And make sure when you're instructing Rabina, and for all experts now, the new practice direction in force from the 1st of November 2024, which gives guidelines in section 9 as to how expert reports should be structured. Now, Rabina, you also mentioned you've gone into trauma-informed, and you're a trauma-informed trainer. Just explain to us what that involves. What is a trauma-informed trainer?
Yeah, so most of the cases, in my experience, clients have suffered a trauma back in their own country. Hence, they've fled from their own country and traveled very dangerously to come to the UK by however means that they've traveled here. So trauma kind of results from an event or series of events or set of circumstances that is experienced by that individual physically or emotionally, and can be harmful and threatening to that individual. And this can have a lasting adverse effect on that individual's functioning in a physical, social, emotional, kind of spiritual well-being. So we as probation officers talk a lot, and I think social services also talk about adverse childhood experience and the trauma linked to that. So this, when we're talking about what is trauma-informed approach, it's about being trauma-informed means recognizing that trauma, that someone has experienced a trauma in their life as an individual, and is acknowledging that trauma and providing appropriate support for that person. So when we talk about trauma-informed approach, is a change of perspective, and it's a line of questioning. It's how we question the client to make them feel comfortable, relaxed, and they don't feel that they're a victim. We're not re-victimizing them. So that's the key thing, that we're not re-victimizing. So maybe questions like, what's wrong with you? That's very aggressive in a manner, especially for someone who's suffered trauma. We might change it to, so can you tell me what's happened to you today? So it's about being trauma-informed. It's about being aware of the language that we speak. It's about being aware of their behavior. Maybe sometimes we might need to ask them for a break, a comfort break, and it's about acknowledging when do we ask the client for that comfort break in order to kind of get them to compose themselves. And because what we're doing is, when we're asking questions, especially in probation, independent reports, we're asking them, we're reopening a wound that they're trying to let go of. So it's about making sure that they're comfortable, and we use the language that is appropriate to them, really, and acknowledging that they might need a break, or that day that might not be suitable for them. We might have to reconvene on another day. So yeah, that's what it is. It's just simply about the language that we speak, and we're not re-victimizing the clients.
And is that something, you're a trauma-informed trainer, do you do training for people like sort of legal representatives who might on a day-to-day basis have to take detailed, let's take it out of a deportation criminality context, but say detailed instructions from an asylum seeker who's gone through a very traumatic event in terms of persecution, maybe sexual violence? Is that something you train solicitors in terms of taking instructions and dealing with traumatized clients?
I do. So I provide a half a day training, and I also provide a full day training, and it kind of encompasses a whole host of what is trauma, how do we approach trauma, the language that we use, our professional boundaries, also being able to read the signs from the clients as well, and maybe also their response. They could be quite flippant, could be quite angry. Simply, it's about raising the awareness, really.
Now that's really helpful. And at the end of this, I'm sure we'll talk about how people can get in touch with you, and I'll make sure your details are available in the description. Just, are there any other, you've talked about the way we frame questions, are there any other practical tips? Say if I was well, I'm a lawyer working with asylum seekers, but how would you encourage me a practical tip with working with victims of trauma?
It's about being empathetic to them. We can't sympathize because we haven't been in their shoes. Being empathetic to them is about being mindful that we're not repeating what's already been said. So if they've already explained their trauma, about being aware that this has already been explained. What we don't want to is ask them to relive that trauma throughout that interview. So it's about being mindful that we reflect back. So if someone said, if they've given a narrative about their trauma, it's about saying, okay, so this is what you meant, rather than making assumptions or misunderstanding or terms that they may use that we might not be familiar with. But also it's about our terminologies that we use, clients may not be familiar with. So it's about finding a communication that is effective for both parties, and also being reflective and then summarizing what they've said, just to make sure that we've understood. And for me, yeah, that's the key thing, really.
That's really helpful, and I would encourage people who are representing clients at the tribunal and they're giving evidence perhaps about traumatic matters and they're vulnerable witnesses to refer to the practice direction and the guidance on vulnerable witnesses, and the equal treatment bench book as well, the practice direction. So you can invite the judge to have some sort of special measures in the way the evidence is given to take into account of the individual vulnerability of a particular witness, because vulnerability is so important and it's something you need to raise with the tribunal when it comes to giving evidence. So Rabina, drawing things together in terms of your work, both in risk assessments in deportation cases and trauma-informed training for lawyers, what services can you offer, and how do people get in touch with you if they want to use your services or perhaps have a further discussion after listening to us?
Sure, thank you very much. So they can contact me by my LinkedIn details provided below, and also my email address is Rabina Haque at hotmail.co.uk. And so they can speak to me directly or via the internet and LinkedIn, really. And if they require training, I can do training per firm or a couple of firms together. Yeah. If they require half a day, I'm fairly flexible. I can do a half a day. I can do a full day training, because trauma informed it's more difficult than just putting it in a couple of words.
No, absolutely. And just something I hinted at earlier, but I didn't properly ask you, is if a client has already been deported or removed from the United Kingdom and is seeking re-entry, are you happy to do assessments in those cases? So the client's abroad, has been deported, now looking to get the deportation order revoked and come back. Are you happy to assess clients that are overseas?
I have written reports for people who have been deported back to their native country, predominantly in Jamaica and other places as well. So I do reports where if clients have been deported and looking at about re-entering the United Kingdom, also clients in the UK as well.
Absolutely. Well, fantastic, Rabina. Thank you so much for giving up your time today, both to talk about your risk assessment work, the trauma work, and even people who can see your background there. Can encourage people, if they want to learn more about probation officers, to have a read of your book. So, Rabina, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you very much, Adam, for having me.